I used to think my family could only hurt me with insults, but I was wrong. They tried to erase my existence legally in open court. When my brother stood up and screamed that the yacht and the penthouse would be his, it felt like the end. Then the judge noticed a tiny detail everyone else had missed. The entire room went silent, and in just 5 minutes, everything turned against them. My name is Madeline Rowe. I am 36 years old, and until 8:45 this morning, I was a ghost. I live in Southport, Connecticut, a town that feels like a watercolor painting of old money and quiet privilege. It is the kind of place where people mind their own business because they are too busy managing their portfolios. That was why I chose it. I rent a small, unassuming 2-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. It has creaky floorboards and a view of a maple tree that turns a violent shade of red in October. It is not the kind of place where a woman with a 7-figure net worth usually lives. But that is the point. My wealth is a secret. My life is a fortress. And I thought the walls were high enough to keep the monsters out. I was wrong. The morning started innocuously enough. It was a Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the electric kettle to boil, watching the gray light of the Sound filter through the window. I had a Zoom meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock with a client in Seattle who needed a complete rebrand for their organic skincare line. My mind was occupied with font weights and color palettes. Then, there was a knock at the door. It was not a friendly knock. It was a heavy, authoritative thud that rattled the frame. I do not get visitors. I do not order food delivery. My friends know to text first. I set my mug down on the counter and felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood there. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a nondescript windbreaker and holding a clipboard. He did not look like a delivery driver. He looked like bad news. I opened the door, leaving the safety chain on. "Ms. Rowe?" he asked. His voice was flat, bored. He had done this 1,000 times. "Who is asking?" I said, my hand tightening on the doorframe. "Madeline Rowe?" he repeated, not looking up from his clipboard. "I have a delivery for you." He slid a thick manila envelope through the crack in the door before I could protest. It was heavy. I felt the weight of it in my hands, a dense brick of paper that smelled of toner and bureaucracy. Before I could ask who sent it, the man turned and walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the hallway. He did not look back. He had done his job. Now my nightmare was beginning. I closed the door and locked it. I slid the deadbolt home. Then I looked at the envelope. There was no return address, but there was a stamp in the upper right corner that made my blood run cold. It was the official seal of the State of Connecticut Superior Court. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. My hands shook as I tore open the flap. I pulled out the stack of documents. They were stapled together at the top, thick and terrifying. I read the title page, and the air left the room. In the matter of the estate of Madeline Rowe, petition for involuntary conservatorship and guardianship of the person and estate. I had to read it 3 times. The words swam before my eyes, refusing to make sense. Conservatorship, guardianship. These were words for the elderly, for people with advanced dementia, for those who could not feed themselves or remember their own names. They were not words for a 36-year-old woman who ran a successful consulting firm and managed a diverse investment portfolio. Then I saw the names listed under petitioners. Graham Rowe, Marjorie Rowe, Blake Rowe, my father, my mother, my younger brother. I sank onto the floor of my entryway, the papers sprawling out around me like a fan. The cold hardwood seeped through my leggings, but I was already freezing. I started to read. I forced myself to read every single word, even as bile rose in my throat. The petition was a masterclass in fiction. It was a terrifyingly well-written assassination of my character. They did not accuse me of being violent. That would be too easy to disprove. Instead, they painted a portrait of a woman who was mentally fragile, socially isolated, and fundamentally incapable of functioning in the real world. The respondent, Madeline Rowe, has exhibited a pattern of erratic behavior and decision-making. One paragraph read, "She has withdrawn from all familial support systems and has isolated herself in a location unknown to the family until recently. We have reason to believe she is suffering from a severe delusional disorder that renders her susceptible to undue influence and fraud." I flipped the page. It got worse. The respondent is believed to be in possession of significant assets which she is neglecting or mismanaging due to her incapacity. She lives in squalor despite having access to family funds. Squalor? I looked around my clean, bright apartment. It was modest, yes, but squalor? We respectfully request that the court appoint Graham Rowe and Blake Rowe as co-conservators of the estate, with full authority to manage all financial assets, real property, and business interests. We further request that Marjorie Rowe be appointed conservator of the person, with authority to determine the respondent's place of residence and make all medical decisions on her behalf. I stopped breathing. This was not just about money. If this petition went through, if a judge signed this piece of paper, I would cease to be a person. I would become property. My mother could decide where I lived. She could force me into a facility. She could force me onto medication. My father and Blake could seize my bank accounts, sell my apartment, liquidate my stocks, and sell the yacht I had spent 2 years restoring. They could take away my right to sign a contract, to vote, to marry, to hire a lawyer. It was a legal kidnapping, and they had done it right here in America, using the very laws designed to protect the vulnerable. Panic flared. Hot and white, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the papers into confetti. I wanted to run out the door, get in my car, and drive until I hit the Pacific Ocean, but I did not. I closed my eyes and took a breath. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. Think, Madeline. I told myself, they expect you to panic. They expect the erratic daughter. Do not give them what they want. I opened my eyes. The panic was still there, but I shoved it into a box in the back of my mind. I needed to be cold. I needed to be precise. I needed to be the woman who built a business from nothing, not the scared little girl they remembered. I stood up and carried the papers to my desk. I grabbed my phone. It was 8:52 in the morning. I opened the camera app. My hands were steady now, a forced, unnatural calm taking over. I took a picture of the process server's car driving away. Though I had missed his face, I took a picture of the envelope. I took a high-resolution photo of every single page of the petition, making sure the page numbers and the text were legible. I opened my laptop and logged into my encrypted cloud storage. I created a new folder. I named it War. I uploaded everything. Then I emailed the files to a dummy account I had set up years ago, just in case. They claimed I was isolated. They claimed I was incompetent. Reading the details, I realized how carefully they had constructed this trap. They cited my lack of social media presence as proof of my withdrawal from reality. They cited my freelance career as unstable unemployment. They twisted my frugal lifestyle into evidence of mental illness. Madeline refuses to engage in the lifestyle commensurate with her background, indicating a break from reality. My mother's affidavit claimed, "It was brilliant, it was evil, and it was terrifyingly plausible to a stranger. A judge who did not know me would see a concerned, wealthy family trying to save their lost daughter. They would see a lawyer father, a philanthropist mother, and a finance-educated brother. They would look at me, a single woman living in a rental, wearing thrift store sweaters, and they would nod. They would sign the paper." My phone buzzed on the desk. The sound was so loud in the quiet room that I jumped. I looked at the screen. A text message. Blake Rowe. I stared at the name. We had not spoken in 6 months. I had blocked his number. But clearly, he had used a burner or an online service, because this came through from a number I did not recognize. But the signature was unmistakable. I picked up the phone. The message was short. "Sis, don't make a big deal out of this. It is just a formality to protect you. Mom is really worried. Just let us handle the heavy lifting for a while. It is for your own good." I read it twice. Heavy lifting. That was Blake's code for spending money. He wanted to handle the heavy lifting of my portfolio. He wanted the heavy lifting of my freedom. The audacity was breathtaking. He was texting me while I was holding a court document that would strip me of my human rights, telling me to relax. It was gaslighting of the highest order. He wanted me to be passive. He wanted me to call them, crying, asking why. He wanted me to play the victim so he could play the savior. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the message. I uploaded it to the war folder. Then I looked back at the court papers. I turned to the last page, the notice of hearing. I needed to know how much time I had. How long did I have before I had to stand in front of a judge and prove I was sane? My eyes found the date. November 14th. Today was November 1st. They had not just filed this yesterday. The date on the filing stamp was 3 weeks ago. They had waited until the last possible legal moment to serve me. They had timed it perfectly. They wanted me to have less than 2 weeks to find a lawyer, build a defense, and prepare for the fight of my life. I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. Outside, the world was still normal. The birds were singing. The mailman was making his rounds. But inside my apartment, the air had changed. It felt thin. It felt dangerous. I looked at the date again, November 14th. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would crumble. They thought Madeline Rowe was the same girl who used to hide in her room while they criticized her clothes and her dreams. I picked up a pen and circled the date. The ink bled through the paper. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. They had tracked me down, cataloged my life, and written a script where I was the villain and they were the heroes. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that because I lived quietly, I was weak. They had assumed that because I did not flaunt my money, I did not know how to use it. I looked at the phone, at Blake's message still glowing on the screen. It is for your own good. No, Blake, it is for yours. And you are going to regret the day you decided to sign your name next to mine. I reached for my phone again, but not to call them. I opened my browser and typed in a name I had been saving for an emergency I hoped would never happen. Avery Holt. The war had started, and they had fired the first shot, but they had no idea what kind of ammunition I had been stockpiling in the dark, to understand why my own flesh and blood would try to imprison me in a legal cage. You have to understand the ecosystem that spawned us. The court petition claimed I was mentally unstable because I lived a private life. In the world of Graham and Marjorie Rowe, privacy was not a preference. It was a failure of marketing. We grew up in Crestview Hills, Kentucky, in a house that looked less like a home and more like a brochure for the American dream. It was a sprawling Georgian colonial with 6 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, and a lawn so manicured it looked like green carpet. My father, Graham, was a senior partner at Halloway & Klein, a law firm that specialized in corporate litigation and burying inconvenient truths for pharmaceutical companies. He was a man who did not have conversations. He conducted depositions. Even at the dinner table, passing the salt felt like admitting guilt to a crime you did not commit. He was obsessed with the concept of the Rowe brand. In his mind, we were not a family, we were a firm, and he was the managing partner. My mother, Marjorie, was his head of public relations. She was the kind of woman who treated charity as a competitive sport. She sat on 5 different boards, organized 3 galas a year, and measured her self-worth in the column inches of the local society pages. Her love was conditional, dispensed in direct proportion to how well we reflected light onto her. If I wore the right dress and smiled at the right donors, I was her darling daughter. If I sulked or, God forbid, expressed an opinion that contradicted the prevailing mood of the room, I was a problem to be managed. And then there was Blake. From the moment he was born, Blake was the designated heir. He was the asset. I was the liability. Blake was 2 years younger than me, but he was treated with the deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. He played lacrosse because the partner's sons played lacrosse. He went to business camp in the summer. He was groomed for finance before he could even do long division. My parents poured resources into him like they were funding a startup. Private tutors, golf lessons, a brand new BMW when he turned 16. I, on the other hand, was what my father called a glitch in the system. I did not care about the country club hierarchy. I liked to draw. I liked understanding how things worked. By high school, I was obsessed with brand strategy and graphic design. I saw the world in fonts and color theory. I wanted to create things, not just manage money that other people had created. This was unacceptable in the Rowe household. Creative was a synonym for unemployed. I remember a dinner party when I was 22. I had just graduated from university with a degree in visual communications, a major my father had refused to pay for, forcing me to take out loans and work 3 jobs. Blake was 20, still in college, failing upward through a finance degree that my father was practically writing the papers for. The dining room was filled with the usual suspects, 2 judges, a bank vice president, and a few of my mother's charity committee friends. The crystal chandelier was polished to a blinding shine. The air smelled of roast beef and expensive perfume. "So, Madeline," the bank vice president asked, swirling his red wine. "Graham tells me you have finished school. Are you planning to go to law school like your old man?" My father answered before I could open my mouth. "Oh, Madeline is taking a gap year," he said, his voice smooth, dismissing my entire existence with a wave of his hand. "She is figuring out what she wants to do with her little art projects before she settles down and finds a real career." I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the clatter of silverware, "I have started my own freelance design studio. I already have 3 clients on retainer." The table went quiet. My mother's smile froze. It was a rictus of terror. She looked at me with eyes that said, "Shut up. You are ruining the narrative." "Freelance," my father chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. "That is a polite word for unemployed, isn't it?" He looked around the table, inviting his guests to share the joke. "We are just hoping she gets this bohemian phase out of her system before she needs us to bail her out." Blake, who was sitting across from me, smirked. He was wearing a polo shirt that cost more than my monthly rent. "I heard you are designing logos for coffee shops." "Maddie," he said, popping a piece of steak into his mouth. "How much does that pay? $5 an hour?" $75 an hour, actually, I said, staring him down, "which is $75 more than you have ever earned in your life without Dad writing the check." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face turned a shade of purple I had only seen once before, when he lost a case in the appellate court. My mother let out a breathless, high-pitched laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Well," she chirped, "who is ready for dessert?" That night, after the guests had left, my father called me into his study. He did not yell. Yelling was for people who lost control. He sat behind his mahogany desk, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "You embarrassed this family tonight," he said. I told the truth, I replied. "The truth is what I say it is," he snapped. "Look at you. You are chasing pennies while your brother is building a future. You are stubborn. Madeline, you always have been. You think you can survive out there on your own with your little drawings? You have no idea how the world works." "I know exactly how it works," I said. "It works on value. And I create value. Blake just consumes it." He stood up then, leaning over the desk. "Get out," he said quietly. "If you think you are so smart, go prove it. But listen to me closely. When you fail, and you will fail, do not come back here. Do not come crying to your mother. Do not ask me for a loan. If you walk out that door, you are on your own. No safety net, no trust fund, nothing." He thought he was threatening me. He thought the fear of poverty would bring me to my knees. He did not realize he was giving me the greatest gift of my life. He was giving me permission to stop pretending. I packed my car that night. It was a 10-year-old sedan I had bought with my own waitressing money. I took my clothes, my laptop, and my hard drive. I left the jewelry they had given me. I left the expensive coat my mother insisted I wear to church. I drove out of Crestview Hills at 3 in the morning. I watched the perfectly manicured lawns and the silent, imposing houses disappear in my rearview mirror. I felt a terror so sharp it made my stomach ache. But beneath the terror was something else. Exhilaration. For the next 14 years, I became a ghost to them. I changed my phone number immediately. I did not just block them. I erased the digital footprint they knew. I stopped using the email address they had. I moved states, first to Ohio, then eventually to Connecticut. I knew how they operated. If they knew where I was, they would try to manage me. They would show up to criticize my apartment. They would send passive-aggressive birthday cards with checks attached, strings visible even through the envelope. So I let them believe what they wanted to believe. I let them believe I was struggling. I let the silence reinforce their narrative that Madeline was the failure, the lost sheep, the cautionary tale. It was safer that way. If they thought I was poor, they would ignore me. If they knew I was building an empire, they would try to annex it. I missed my brother for a little while, or at least the version of him I remembered from when we were small, before the entitlement rotted him from the inside out. But I watched from a distance. I saw his LinkedIn updates. Vice president at 25, director at 28, titles bought and paid for by Graham Rose connections. I saw the photos of him on yachts, at galas, wearing the same smug expression he wore at the dinner table. He was living the life they designed for him. He was burning through cash, leasing luxury cars, and playing the part of the wealthy scion. Meanwhile, I was eating instant noodles in a studio apartment, working 18 hours a day. I was learning tax law. I was learning investment strategies. I was building Northline Brand Studio brick by brick. Every dollar I made was mine. Every contract I signed was a victory they could not claim. I thought I had escaped. I thought that by refusing their money, I had immunized myself against their poison. But as I sat in my apartment in Southport, holding the petition that called me incapacitated, I realized I had been naive. They did not just want to control the money they gave me. They felt entitled to the money I had earned myself. The stubbornness my father mocked, that was the very trait that made me rich. The isolation my mother cried about, that was the focus that built my portfolio. They had taken the virtues that saved me and twisted them into symptoms of a disease. And the most painful part was realizing that my father's prediction had been wrong. I didn't come back begging. So they decided to come and take. When I arrived in Connecticut, I did not have a master plan for revenge. I had a $2,000 Honda Civic, a laptop that overheated if I ran too many programs at once, and a desperate need to prove that I could survive without the Rowe family trust fund. Success did not happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding climb that started in the back room of a coffee shop in New Haven. My first client was a local bakery that needed a logo redesign. I charged them $500. When they paid me, holding that check felt better than any birthday gift my parents had ever given me. It was not much money, but it was clean. It came with no strings attached, no lectures about gratitude, no emotional blackmail. It was a transaction of value for value, and I was hooked. I formalized my business under the name Northline Brand Studio. I chose the name deliberately. It sounded corporate, boring, and vaguely geographical. It sounded like a firm with 10 employees and a glass-walled office, not a single woman working from a dining table she bought at a garage sale. I wanted to be invisible to my family while looking substantial to my clients. The bakery logo led to a website for a landscaping company, which led to a rebranding package for a regional chain of organic grocers. My reputation grew through word of mouth. I was fast. I was reliable. And I understood that a brand was not just a picture, it was a promise. Within 3 years, I was no longer chasing local shops. I was consulting for tech startups in Boston and boutique hotels in New York. My hourly rate went from $50 to $200, and then to $500. But while my income skyrocketed, my lifestyle remained frozen in time. This was the part my family could never understand. To them, money was something you wore. It was a car you parked in the driveway to make the neighbors jealous. To me, money was a shield. Every dollar I saved was a brick in the wall between me and their control. I lived a double life, on Zoom calls with clients. I wore a tailored blazer and sat in front of a carefully curated bookshelf background. Once the camera was off, I was living on a budget that would make a college student cringe. I drove that Honda until the transmission literally fell out onto the highway. I shopped at thrift stores. I meal prepped rice and beans on Sundays. I did not take vacations. I did not upgrade my phone every year. I funneled every spare cent into a diversified portfolio. I taught myself about index funds, municipal bonds, and real estate investment trusts. I became obsessed with compound interest. While Blake was leasing a new Range Rover to impress his friends, I was maxing out my tax-advantaged accounts. I watched my net worth hit $100,000, then $500,000, then the first million. I celebrated that first million by buying a bottle of $12 wine and drinking it alone in my kitchen. I did not post about it. I did not call anyone. Silence was the luxury I was buying. 5 years ago, I made my first major acquisition. I found a foreclosure in Newport, Rhode Island. It was on the top floor of a historic building overlooking the harbor. The real estate listing called it a fixer-upper with potential. I called it the penthouse. I bought it through an LLC to keep my name off the public deed. I paid cash. It took me 2 years to renovate it, doing much of the painting and finishing work myself on weekends. Now, it is my sanctuary. It has floor-to-ceiling windows that capture the sunrise over the Atlantic, wide plank oak floors, and a kitchen that would make a chef weep. It is worth nearly $2 million in today's market. My parents do not know it exists. If they did, my mother would already be planning a cocktail party there, criticizing my choice of curtains while drinking my champagne. Then there was the boat. The yacht mentioned in the lawsuit is not a gleaming fiberglass toy like the ones Blake parties on in Miami. It is a 52-foot vintage cruiser built in 1980. I found her rotting in a boatyard in Mystic, half covered in blue tarps, looking sad and forgotten. I bought her for the price of a mid-sized sedan. Everyone told me I was crazy. They said a boat that old was a money pit. But I saw the lines of the hull. I saw the solid teak interior beneath the grime. I named her the Verity, Truth. Restoring the Verity became my therapy. I spent my weekends in coveralls, sanding down 40 years of varnish, rewiring the electrical panel, and learning diesel mechanics. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from physical labor. When I'm scrubbing the deck or polishing the brass railings, I am not Madeline the disappointment. I am not Madeline the glitch. I am just a woman with a sander and a purpose. Now, the Verity is appraised at $600,000. But to me, she is priceless. She is my escape pod. If the world falls apart, I can untie the lines and disappear into the horizon. My third pillar of security is less romantic, but equally important. I bought a multi-unit residential property in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It is an unglamorous brick building in a working-class neighborhood. It generates steady, reliable rental income every month. I have a property management company handle the tenants, so the checks just appear in my account like clockwork. I have zero debt. I own everything outright. My liquidity is high. My credit score is perfect. So why hide it? Why let my family continue to sneer at me? Why let them believe I am scraping by in a rental apartment? Because I know them. If Graham and Marjorie Rowe knew I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar portfolio, the dynamic would shift instantly. They would not be proud. They would be possessive. In their minds, I am an extension of them. Therefore, my success is their success. My assets are their assets. They would demand to manage my investments. Blake would pitch me terrible business ideas and expect me to fund them for the family. My mother would expect me to host her charity events at my Newport penthouse. They would criticize how I spend my money, telling me I should buy a newer car or join their country club, chipping away at my autonomy until I was back under their thumb. Worse, they would use guilt. They would remind me of how much they spent on my childhood, tallying up a debt that can never be repaid. They would say, "We are a family. Madeline, we share." But in the Rowe family, sharing only flows one way, from the children to the parents' ego. I could not risk it. I preferred their pity to their greed. There is only one person in this world who knows the full extent of my balance sheet. Her name is Tessa Lane. We met at a networking event in Hartford 10 years ago. Tessa is a forensic accountant. She is sharp, cynical, and has zero tolerance for nonsense. She was the one who helped me set up my LLC structures. She is the one who audits my books every quarter. Not because I don't trust myself, but because I want a paper trail of sanity. Tessa was the one who told me, years ago, Madeline, you are not just saving money, you are building a war chest. I laughed at the time. I asked her who I was going to war with. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and said, Your family, you might not be fighting them now, but one day, they are going to come for you. People like that always do when the supply runs low. She was right. Tessa has visited the penthouse. She has helped me varnish the railings on the Verity. She knows that when I wear a faded sweater, it is a choice, not a necessity. She knows that I am not unstable or erratic. She knows I am the most disciplined person she has ever met. When I showed her the lawsuit, the petition claiming I was incompetent, Tessa did not gasp. She did not cry. She just poured 2 cups of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened her laptop. Okay, she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly professional. They want to talk about finances? Let's talk about finances. I have 10 years of your tax returns and bank statements backed up on 3 different servers. If they want a forensic audit, I will give them a forensic audit that will make their heads spin. I looked at her, and for the first time since the process server knocked on my door, I felt a spark of hope. My family thought they were attacking a lonely, broke spinster who lived in a rental. They thought they were kicking down a door made of cardboard. They had no idea they were walking straight into a vault made of steel, built by the very daughter they had thrown away. And inside that vault, I had the receipts, every single one of them. The office of Holt and Rayner Advocacy was nothing like the polished marble mausoleum where my father worked. It was located in a converted brick warehouse in downtown Hartford, sandwiched between a data recovery firm and a boxing gym. There was no receptionist with a fake smile. There was no espresso machine in the lobby. There was just a heavy steel door and the faint sound of aggressive typing coming from inside. I walked in at 9 o'clock sharp on Wednesday morning. Avery Holt was waiting for me. She was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of granite. She was perhaps 50 years old, with short steel gray hair and glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She did not shake my hand. She pointed to a leather chair across from her desk that looked like it had survived a few wars. Sit, she said. Let me see the weapon. I handed her the manila envelope. Avery put on her glasses and opened the file. The room was silent for 20 minutes, save for the rhythmic thumping of the speed bag from the gym next door and the rustle of paper as Avery turned the pages. She read with a terrifying intensity, her eyes scanning every line, every footnote, every timestamp. Occasionally, she would make a small noise, a grunt, a sigh, a sharp intake of breath that made my stomach twist. Finally, she closed the folder and took off her glasses. She looked at me, and her expression was not one of pity. It was the look a mechanic gives a car that has been sabotaged. You know what this is? Do you not? She asked, her voice low and raspy. A guardianship petition, I said. No, she corrected me. This is a heist. She stood up and walked to a whiteboard on the wall. She picked up a marker. I have seen hundreds of these. Madeline, when a family is genuinely concerned about a mental health crisis, the petition is messy, it is emotional, it focuses on medical history, on safety, on doctor's reports. This? She tapped the folder hard with her knuckle. This is sterile. It is strategic. It focuses entirely on control. Look at the language. She wrote 3 words on the board: asset, contract, estate. They mention mental instability in the first paragraph. She continued, but look at the relief they are requesting. They are not asking for a treatment plan. They are asking for plenary power over the estate. That means total control. They want the power to sell your property without court approval. They want the power to access your accounts without your signature. They want the power to void any contract you have signed in the last 12 months. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. They are not trying to get you into a hospital. Madeline, they are trying to get into your bank account, and they drafted this with a specific urgency. They filed for an emergency temporary hearing. That means they want to bypass the usual evidentiary waiting period. They want to catch you off guard, get a judge to sign a temporary order, and drain your liquidity before you even have time to hire someone like me. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew it was bad, but hearing it laid out like a military strategy made it real. "Why now?" I asked. "I have been estranged for 14 years. Why pull the trigger now?" Avery sat back down and leaned forward. "That is the million-dollar question, or knowing your father's firm. Perhaps the $10 million question. Tell me about the last time you spoke to any of them. Not a fight, not a confrontation, a conversation where they seemed curious." I racked my brain. The silence between us had been thick for years, but there had been a breach in the wall about 4 months ago. "Blake," I said slowly. "He called me in July. He said it was his birthday and he was feeling sentimental. He was drunk." "What did he ask?" Avery demanded. "He was rambling. He talked about how hard it was to make money in the current market. He complained about interest rates. Then he asked me." I paused, the memory sharpening. "He asked me if I was still doing that little art thing. I told him business was good. He laughed and asked if I had enough to put into crypto because he had a sure thing. I told him I do not touch crypto. I told him I stick to boring index funds and real estate." "Did you mention the real estate?" Avery asked sharply. I might have said I was busy with a renovation. I admitted. I didn't say where. I didn't say what. Avery nodded grimly. "That was enough. You admitted you had capital. You admitted you had assets to renovate. To a desperate man. That sounds like a dinner bell." She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a second file. This one was black. "I did not just read your petition last night, Madeline. I did what your father taught you to do. I did my due diligence. I called a private investigator I use for financial forensics." She slid the black file across the desk toward me. "Open it." I opened the folder. The first page was a summary of Graham and Marjorie Rowe's financial standing. I expected to see wealth. I expected to see the millions I grew up hearing about. Instead, I saw red ink everywhere. "The house in Crestview Hills?" I whispered, staring at the numbers. "Mortgaged," Avery said. "Not just once, 3 times. They have a primary mortgage, a home equity line of credit that is maxed out, and a private bridge loan taken out 6 months ago with an interest rate that borders on usury." I flipped the page. Credit cards. My mother had 5 platinum cards. All of them were hovering near their limits. There were payments missed, then caught up, then missed again. It was a pattern of someone juggling chainsaws. "But my father is a partner," I said, trying to reconcile this with the image of the man who sneered at my $75 an hour. "He makes hundreds of thousands a year." "He did," Avery said. "Turn to page 5. I turned the page. It was a printout from a legal news blog, dated 2 weeks ago. The headline was small, buried in the back pages, but the words screamed at me. "Holloway and Klein faces malpractice inquiry in pharmaceutical class action defense." "Your father is the lead partner on that defense," Avery explained. "The rumor on the street, and my investigator has good ears, is that he missed a filing deadline that cost the client a massive settlement. The firm is facing a clawback. His partnership share is at risk. If he gets voted out, or if he is forced to settle personally to save his license, he is looking at a liability of over $2 million. I sat back, stunned. The impregnable fortress of Graham Rowe was made of paper. "And Blake?" I asked. Avery snorted. "Your brother is a financial black hole. He leases a Porsche he cannot afford. He has been taking vacations to St. Bart's and Aspen on credit. He owes gambling debts to some very impatient bookmakers in New Jersey." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray alleyway. "Here is the picture. Madeline, your family is drowning. They are not just broke. They are insolvent. They have been living on reputation and credit for years, and the bill has finally come due. They need liquid cash, and they need it yesterday. They cannot get loans because their credit is shot. They cannot sell the house because they have no equity left in it." She turned back to me. "And then, Blake remembers his quiet sister, the one with no husband, no kids, And a little business that seems to be doing well. The one who mentioned real estate. They did the math. They figure if they can get a guardianship, they can liquidate your assets, your portfolio, your yacht, your penthouse, and use that cash to plug the holes in their own sinking ship. They will call it management fees. They will reimburse themselves for legal costs. By the time anyone notices, your money will be gone, and they will be safe. It was not just a betrayal, it was a harvest. To them, I was not a person. I was a piggy bank to be smashed open in an emergency. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, replacing the fear. They were willing to declare me insane, to strip me of my civil rights, just to pay off their credit cards and save my father's ego. So, what do? I asked. My voice was steady. Do we show this to the judge? Do we file a motion to dismiss? Avery smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. No, if we file a motion to dismiss now, they will just withdraw the petition and try again later, or they will try to settle. They will scurry back into the shadows. We do not want that. She sat down and leaned across the desk, her eyes locking with mine. We are going to let them walk into the courtroom. We are going to let them take the stand. We are going to let them lie under oath. We are going to let them paint their picture of the helpless, crazy Madeline and the benevolent, wealthy Rowe family. She tapped the black file. And when they have said it all, when they have committed perjury on the record, we are going to trap them. We are going to show the judge that the people claiming you cannot manage money are the ones who are bankrupt. We are going to show the court that the protectors are actually predators. She paused. But you have to be ready. Madeline, they are going to say terrible things about you. They are going to humiliate you. You have to sit there and take it. You cannot cry. You cannot scream. You have to be ice. Can you do that? I thought about the years of silence. I thought about the instant noodles. I thought about the varnish on my hands and the late nights building my company. I thought about Blake telling me it was for my own good. I looked at Avery Holt. I have been practicing for this my whole life, I said. Good, Avery said, opening her laptop. Then let us prepare the bear trap. We spent the rest of the afternoon building our defense. It was not just about proving I was sane. That was the easy part. The hard part was constructing the narrative that would expose them without making me look vindictive. We needed a timeline. We mapped out the dates of my father's malpractice notices against the dates of the petition filing. They matched almost perfectly. We mapped out Blake's credit card defaults against the date he sent me that text message. Avery brought in her paralegal, a young man named David who typed faster than anyone I had ever seen. We drafted subpoenas. We were not just going to defend. We were going to counterattack. We prepared subpoenas for my father's partnership agreement. We prepared subpoenas for Blake's car lease documents. We are going to ask for these in discovery. Avery said, They will object, of course. They will say it is irrelevant, but the judge will have to rule on it. And even asking the question will make them sweat. By the time I left Avery's office, the sun was setting. The air outside was cold and crisp. I walked to my car, the heavy manila envelope still in my bag, but now it was joined by the black folder. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank app, alerting me that a client had paid an invoice, $3,500. I looked at the number. It was real. It was mine. My family thought they were orchestrating a tragedy where I was the victim. They did not realize that Avery and I were rewriting the script. We were turning it into a procedural thriller, and in the final act, the detectives were going to win. I started the engine. I had a lot of work to do. I had to organize my tax returns. I had to call Tessa. I had to polish my armor. I drove home, not to hide, but to wait. The courtroom date was set for November 14th, 2 weeks. Tick-tock, Graham, tick-tock. The 2 weeks leading up to November 14th were not spent in fear. They were spent in a state of cold, calculated architecture. If my family wanted to build a cage for me, Avery and I were going to build a fortress, brick by boring brick, until their entire narrative smashed against it and shattered. Avery was a general in a blazer. She did not want vague assurances of my sanity. She wanted data. We need to bury them in paper. Madeline, she told me on the second day of our prep, the court expects a conservatorship case to be about emotions. We are going to make it about administration. I want every tax return you have filed for the last 7 years. I want your profit and loss statements. I want your client contracts. I want a calendar of every deadline you have met since 2018. I treated it like the biggest rebranding project of my career. The brand was Madeline Rowe, and the core values were stability, competence, and transparency. I spent 3 days scanning documents. I compiled a binder that was 3 inches thick. It contained my Schedule C tax forms, showing a steady upward trajectory of income. It contained my quarterly estimated tax payments to the IRS, stamped and dated, proving I did not just make money, but I managed the bureaucratic obligations that came with it. People who are erratic and incapacitated do not file their taxes on time for a decade straight. Next came the witnesses. Avery was very specific. We do not want character witnesses who will just say you are a nice person. She said, nice people get committed all the time. We need witnesses who can testify to your executive function. I called Marcus, the CEO of the tech startup in Boston I had consulted for last year. When I explained the situation, omitting the family drama and sticking to the legal facts, he was furious on my behalf. He wrote a sworn affidavit stating that I had managed a rebranding budget of $250,000 for his company, that I had delivered all assets 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and that my strategic input had directly contributed to a 15% increase in their user engagement. It was a glowing review, but more importantly, it was a receipt. It quantified my value in a language my father understood: return on investment. Then there was the social aspect. The petition claimed I was isolated and withdrawn. To counter this, Tessa Lane stepped up. Tessa did not just write a letter. She drafted a notarized affidavit that read like a forensic audit of a friendship. She listed the dates of our monthly dinners. She attached receipts from a weekend trip we took to Vermont 3 months ago. She listed the names of the 5 other people in our book club. She dismantled the image of the lonely hermit and replaced it with a portrait of a private, selective woman who simply chose not to invite her abusive family into her happy life. While I built my defense, Avery was sharpening her spear. She filed a motion for discovery regarding Graham's finances. As expected, his lawyers, a junior associate from his firm, likely doing this pro bono to curry favor, objected immediately. They called it a fishing expedition and irrelevant to the matter of my mental health. Avery did not back down. She sent a response arguing that since the petitioners were asking to manage my estate, their own financial competency and potential conflicts of interest were directly relevant. She knew the judge might not grant full access to their accounts before the hearing, but the mere act of asking was a signal. It told them we knew. It told them we were looking at the cracks in their foundation. The most grueling part of the preparation was the behavioral training. Avery cleared the conference room table and sat across from me. She took off her glasses and looked at me with a harsh, critical expression. I am going to be your father's lawyer, she said. I am going to bait you. I am going to insult you. And if you raise your voice, if you cry, or if you get sarcastic, we lose. Do you understand? I nodded. Avery slammed her hand on the table. Verbalize, she snapped. Yes, I understand, I said, straightening my spine. She began the interrogation. Ms. Rowe, isn't it true you refused to come home for Christmas for the last 6 years? Yes, I said. Because you don't love your mother? She pressed, her voice dripping with judgment. I did not answer that. It was a trap. Because I had work commitments. I corrected myself. Wrong, Avery said, breaking character. Do not make excuses. Do not justify. Just state facts. Try again. Why didn't you go home? I spent the holidays at my own residence, I said. Better, Avery said. Then she switched tactics. She leaned in, her voice softening, becoming fake and sweet. Madeline, your brother is so worried about you. He says you sound paranoid on the phone, that you think people are watching you. Is that why you live alone? Because you are afraid? I felt a flash of irritation. I am not afraid. I wanted to snap. No, I said calmly. I value my privacy and independence. Avery drilled me for 4 hours. She attacked my clothing choices. She attacked my career. She brought up the fact that I wasn't married. She tried every button my family had installed in my psyche since birth. By the end of it, I was exhausted, but I was numb. I had learned to dissociate my emotions from my answers. I had learned that silence was a valid response. I had learned that "I do not recall" was a complete sentence. They are going to put on a show. Madeline, Avery warned me as I packed up my binder, your mother will cry. She will bring a handkerchief. She will look at you with heartbroken eyes. Your father will look like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. They want the judge to feel sorry for the poor parents dealing with a difficult child. Do not look at them. Look at the judge. Look at me. If you look at them, you will fall into their rhythm. I understood. This was theater, and I refused to be a supporting actor in their tragedy. 2 days before the hearing, Avery made a move that confused me at first. She hired an independent appraiser to evaluate my assets. We sent him to the penthouse in Newport. We sent him to the marina to inspect the Verity. We had him certify the current value of my investment accounts. Why are we doing this? I asked. If we show them how much I have, won't that make them fight harder? Avery smiled, and it was the smile of a hunter setting a snare. We are not showing them, she said. We are sealing this report. We are going to bring it to court in a sealed envelope. We will only open it if they accuse you of hiding assets or if they try to downplay your success. It is our ace in the hole. If Blake gets up there and says you are destitute or managing your money poorly, we open the envelope and prove that you are better at capitalism than he is. It is the element of surprise. I watched the appraiser sign the seal on the thick envelope. Inside that packet was the truth of my life. The millions I had made, the property I had restored, the freedom I had bought. It sat on Avery's desk like a loaded weapon. The night before the trial, I drove to my rental apartment in Southport. I did not go to the penthouse. I needed to be in the place where the process server had found me. I needed to remember the feeling of invasion. It was cold, a typical November chill that seeped through the glass. I stood on my small balcony, wrapped in a wool blanket, looking out toward the dark water of the Sound. I could see the lights of Long Island in the distance, tiny pinpricks of yellow against the black. 14 years ago, I had run away in the middle of the night. I had been a terrified girl in a used Honda, fleeing because I didn't have the strength to fight them. I had spent over a decade hiding, making myself small, keeping my voice down so they wouldn't hear me. I realized then that the hiding ended tomorrow. I was done being the ghost. I was done being the glitch. My phone sat on the table inside. I knew Blake was probably texting me right now, or maybe my mother was leaving a voicemail about how much she loved me and just wanted me safe. I did not check. I did not care. I went inside and laid out my clothes for the morning. I chose a navy blue suit. It was tailored, sharp, and expensive. Not flashy, but the kind of quality that whispered power. I chose a white silk blouse. I polished my shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were steady. There was no fear left, only a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to tell a story about a girl who couldn't take care of herself. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into that courtroom and introduce them to the woman who owned the stage. I turned off the light and went to sleep. I slept soundly, without dreams. Like a soldier on the eve of a battle, she knew she was going to win. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It was not a temperature cold, but a sterility that seeped into your bones. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency that seemed designed to strip away human comfort. I sat at the defense table next to Avery. We had arrived 20 minutes early. I had not looked at the door when it opened behind us. I did not need to turn around to know they had arrived. I could hear the specific, confident click of my father's expensive loafers on the linoleum. I could smell my mother's perfume, Chanel No. 5, heavy and floral. the scent of every unhappy Christmas morning of my childhood. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. Avery leaned over to me, her voice a barely audible whisper. Shoulders back. Madeline, you are a statue. You do not react. You do not flinch. Let them be the ones who perform. I straightened my spine and placed my hands on the table, clasping them loosely. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Marissa Calder entered the room. She was a small woman with sharp features and gray hair pulled back into a severe bun. She did not look like the kind of judge who enjoyed the theatrics of family court. She moved with efficient, sharp movements. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the rim of them at the two tables. Her gaze lingered on my father for a second longer than necessary, perhaps recognizing the name, perhaps recognizing the type. You may be seated, Judge Calder said. Her voice was dry, devoid of warmth. We are here on the matter of the estate of Madeline Rowe. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Let us not waste time. Counsel for the petitioners. You may proceed. My family's lawyer stood up. He was a man named Silas Thorne, a fixture in the local legal community known for his smooth voice and his ability to make wolves look like sheepdogs. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked to the center of the room. Your Honor, he began, his voice dropping an octave to convey solemnity. We are here today with heavy hearts. This is not a dispute over money. This is a rescue mission. The Rowe family sits before you not as adversaries to Madeline, but as terrified parents and a concerned brother. We are here because Madeline Rowe is a danger to her own future. She has cut herself off from the people who love her. She has exhibited signs of severe paranoia and instability. We believe she is currently in possession of assets she is mentally unfit to manage, and without the court's intervention, she will fall prey to fraud or her own erratic impulses. We are asking for the legal authority to bring her home, metaphorically and literally. It was a beautiful speech. If I did not know better, I would have believed it. Judge Calder looked at him, her face unreadable. Call your first witness. Marjorie Rowe took the stand. My mother wore a soft beige cardigan over a modest dress. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps she was just playing the part of the frail, worried mother. She held a lace handkerchief in her hand, twisting it nervously. Mrs. Rowe. Silas Thorne asked gently, Can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter? My mother sniffed. She dabbed at her eyes, though I could clearly see they were dry. We were so close once, she said, her voice trembling. Madeline was such a happy child. But then, she changed. She became distant. She started accusing us of trying to control her whenever we offered advice. 14 years ago, she just left. No goodbye, no explanation. She just vanished. And have you tried to reach out? Thorne asked. Oh, constantly. My mother lied. I call. I send letters. She never answers. It is not normal. Your Honor, no child treats their mother this way unless something is wrong with their mind. We just want to make sure she's safe. I lay awake at night terrified she's living on the street, or that someone has taken advantage of her. I felt a bubble of laughter trying to rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Living on the street? She knew exactly where I lived. The process server had found me easily enough. Avery wrote something on her notepad. Classic isolation narrative. Don't look at her. My father was next. Graham Rowe did not walk to the witness stand. He marched. He sat down and adjusted the microphone. Looking at the judge as if she were a junior associate he was about to reprimand. Mr. Rowe, Thorne said, you are a senior partner at Halloway and Klein. You understand the law. Why are you seeking this conservatorship? Because assets require structure. My father stated. His voice was firm, professional. He was speaking the language of the courtroom. My daughter has no financial literacy. She has no training in wealth management. We have reason to believe she has come into some small amount of money or property, likely through inheritance from a distant relative, or perhaps a lucky speculation. But without a conservator, that capital is at risk. She is a graphic designer. Your Honor, she draws pictures. She does not understand tax liabilities. She does not understand equity." He paused, looking directly at me with a look of profound disappointment. "It is reckless to let a child play with fire," he added. "I have a fiduciary duty as a father to step in. If she makes a mistake, she could be destitute in a year. We are simply offering to shoulder the burden of administration for her." He made it sound so logical. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor by taking my freedom. Judge Calder made a note. She did not nod. She did not smile. Then it was Blake's turn. My brother strode to the stand. He wore a suit that was too shiny, a watch that was too big, and a smile that was too confident. He sat down and leaned back, draping one arm over the back of the chair. He looked like he was holding court at a country club bar. "Blake, tell us about your sister's behavior," Thorne said. "She is crazy," Blake said bluntly. "Objection," Avery said calmly, not even looking up from her notes. "Speculation." "Sustained," Judge Calder said. "Mr. Rowe, stick to your observations, not your diagnoses." Blake rolled his eyes. "Fine. She is erratic. She is stubborn. She has always been the black sheep. Growing up, she couldn't stick to anything. Now she's living in some rental apartment, hiding from us. I texted her 2 weeks ago to try and help her with some investment advice, just brother to sister, and she completely ignored me." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Look, Madeline, doesn't know the first thing about the real world. She thinks she is independent, but she is just stubborn. She is going to blow whatever money she has on stupid projects or get scammed." "And why does that concern you specifically?" Thorne asked, trying to steer him back to the caring brother script. Blake scoffed. "Because she is a Rowe." He pointed a finger at me. "It is embarrassing. Honestly, we are a prominent family. We have a reputation. She is out there running around like a loose cannon." Then he said it. The words hung in the air like smoke. "If she has anything, the family needs to be the ones to manage it, because she is part of us. What she has is, well, it belongs to the family legacy. The yacht and the penthouse will be mine eventually anyway. Ours. The family's. We need to secure them." The silence that followed was instantaneous. Blake blinked, realizing he had stumbled. He had mentioned the yacht. He had mentioned the penthouse, specific assets that they had not officially listed in their opening statement as things they knew about, only things they suspected, and worse, he had used the words, "will be mine." I saw my father close his eyes briefly. It was a micro-expression of pain. He knew. I saw my mother freeze, her handkerchief halfway to her face. I looked at the judge. Judge Calder had stopped writing. She was looking at Blake Rowe with a gaze that could have cut glass. "You seem to know specific details about these assets, Mr. Rowe," the judge said. Blake stammered. Well, we heard rumors. We did some digging, just to protect her." I kept my face completely neutral. Inside, my heart was hammering a victory rhythm. He said it. He had just admitted that this wasn't about my safety. It was about acquisition. Avery touched my arm under the table. It was the signal. We did not need to wait for their closing. The cracks were already showing. Now it was time to put the wedge in and swing the hammer. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe," Silas Thorne said quickly, trying to get his client off the stand before he did any more damage. No further questions. Judge Calder looked at our table. "Miss Holt, do you wish to cross-examine?" Avery stood up. She did not rush. She buttoned her blazer with a slow, deliberate movement. She picked up the black folder, the one containing the financial forensics on my family. She walked to the podium and placed it down with a heavy thud. She looked at Blake, who was still sitting in the witness box, looking slightly flushed but still arrogant. "Yes, Your Honor," Avery said. Her voice was clear, sharp, and cold as ice water. "I have quite a few questions for Mr. Rowe, and then I have some questions for his parents about the definition of fiscal responsibility." She turned to Blake and smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Mr. Rowe, you just mentioned that my client's assets belong to the family legacy. Interesting choice of words. Let us discuss what exactly that legacy is worth as of 9 a.m. this morning. The room felt small suddenly. The air pressure dropped. The performance was over. The cross-examination was about to begin, and I watched my brother's confidence flicker and die as he looked at the thick black file under Avery's hand. He didn't know what was in it, but looking at Avery's face, he knew it was going to hurt. Avery Holt stood at the podium, her hand resting heavily on the black file. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. Blake shifted in the witness chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by the fidgeting of a schoolboy caught without his homework. "Mr. Rowe," Avery began, her voice deceptively light, "you stated under oath that your sister is incapable of managing her finances. You stated that she does not understand the value of money." "That is right," Blake said, jutting his chin out. "She is an artist. She lives in a dream world." Avery nodded slowly. "Since you are so concerned with her professional life, surely you are familiar with her business structure. Can you name a single client your sister has signed in the last fiscal year?" Blake blinked. "Excuse me?" "A single client," Avery repeated. "A company name, a brand, an individual. Just one entity that has paid Madeline Rowe for her services in the last 12 months. Blake looked at his parents. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. My mother was looking at her hands. "I do not know their names," Blake muttered. "She keeps everything secret. That is part of the problem." Avery turned a page in her notebook. "You do not know. Interesting. Can you tell the court what her gross revenue was for the tax year 2024? Even an estimate?" "I told you she hides it," Blake snapped. "But it cannot be much. She drives a Honda." "So you are basing your assessment of her incompetence entirely on the car she drives?" Avery asked. "Not on ledgers? Not on bank statements? Not on contracts?" "It is common sense," Blake said, his voice rising. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe," Avery said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. "You may step down. You have made your level of knowledge abundantly clear." Blake scrambled off the stand, his face a mottled red. He looked like he wanted to hit something. Avery did not give them time to recover. She called my mother back to the stand. Marjorie Rowe looked like a deer caught in headlights. She sat down, clutching her handkerchief like a lifeline. "Mrs. Rowe," Avery said, leaning against the podium, "you testified that you are terrified for your daughter's safety. You said you lie awake at night worrying about her mental state." "I do," my mother said, her voice trembling. "A mother knows when her child is suffering." Avery took off her glasses. "In the last 8 years, Mrs. Rowe, how many times have you visited Madeline at her home in Southport?" My mother hesitated. "Well, she made it very difficult." The question was a number. "Mrs. Rowe," Avery interrupted. "How many times?" "0, my mother whispered. "0, Avery repeated. "And in those 8 years, have you ever received a letter from a doctor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist suggesting that Madeline was in danger?" "No, but—" "Have you ever called the police to perform a welfare check?" "No." "So," Avery continued, her voice hardening, "you have not seen her. You have no medical evidence. You have never called authorities for a safety check. Yet, coincidentally, 3 weeks ago, you decided she was in such immediate danger that you needed legal control over her bank accounts. Is that correct?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Silas Thorne, their lawyer, but he was busy shuffling papers, refusing to meet her eye. "I just want to help her," my mother said weakly. "No further questions," Avery said. Then came the heavy artillery. Avery called my father. Graham Rowe walked to the stand with less confidence than before. He looked tired. He knew how the game was played, and he could see the board tilting against him. "Mr. Rowe," Avery said, "you are a seasoned attorney. You understand the burden of proof. You are asking this court to strip a 36-year-old woman of her civil rights. You claimed in your opening statement that she poses a financial risk to herself." "That is correct," my father said stiffly. She lacks the structure to handle significant capital. Have you ever seen a tax return filed by Madeline Rowe? Avery asked. No, my father admitted. She has refused to share them. Have you ever seen a profit and loss statement from her business? No. Have you ever seen a credit report with her name on it? No. So, Avery said, walking closer to him, you are asking Judge Calder to grant you control over an estate that you have never seen, based on evidence you do not have, to fix a problem you cannot prove exists. My father straightened his tie. I am basing it on her lifestyle. She lives in a low-income rental. She has no visible assets. That indicates a failure to launch. Or, Avery countered sharply, it indicates a preference for privacy, which brings me to my next witness. My father stepped down, looking furious. Defense calls Marcus Thorne, Avery announced. Marcus walked in. He was young, dressed in a hoodie and a blazer, the uniform of the tech elite. He took the oath. Mr. Thorne? Avery asked. How do you know the respondent, Madeline Rowe? She is the lead brand strategist for my company, Cobalt Systems, Marcus said. And did you pay her for her services? Absolutely, Marcus said. We paid her a retainer of $50,000, plus a project fee of $200,000 upon completion. A ripple of sound went through the courtroom. My mother gasped audibly. Blake's head snapped up. $250,000. From one client? And did she deliver? Avery asked. She delivered 2 weeks early, Marcus said. The rebrand she designed helped us close our Series B funding. She is the most organized, professional consultant I have ever worked with. Thank you, Avery said. Defense calls Tessa Lane. Tessa took the stand. She looked formidable. She glared at my family before turning to the judge. Ms. Lane, Avery said, the petitioners claim Madeline is socially isolated and withdrawn. Is that your experience? Hardly. Tessa scoffed. We have dinner every Thursday. We run a book club with 5 other professional women. We spent a week in Vermont 2 months ago hiking. Madeline is private. Yes, she does not like drama, but she has a circle of friends who respect her. She is not isolated. She is just selective. Thank you, Avery said. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A. These are Madeline Rowe's tax returns for the last 7 years. They show a steady increase in gross revenue, immaculate record-keeping, and full compliance with all state and federal tax laws. She handed a thick binder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Calder opened it. She flipped through the pages. Her eyebrows went up. She looked from the numbers to me, and for the first time, there was a flicker of respect in her eyes. I would also like to submit Defense Exhibit B, Avery continued. This is a current credit report. Ms. Rowe has a credit score of 820. She has 0 consumer debt. She pays every bill on time. The courtroom was silent. The picture of the erratic, incompetent daughter was dissolving, replaced by the reality of a disciplined, wealthy businesswoman. But Avery was not done. She wanted blood. She requested to recall Graham Rowe to the stand. My father looked annoyed as he sat back down. Mr. Rowe, Avery said, holding the black file. We have established that you have no knowledge of Madeline's finances, but you are very concerned about financial health in general. You spoke about the need for structure and risk management. I did, my father said warily. Let us talk about your own risk management, Avery said. She pulled a document from the black folder. Is it true, Mr. Rowe, that the deed to your family home in Crestview Hills currently has 3 liens against it? My father froze. His face went gray. Objection! Silas Thorne shouted, jumping up. Relevance! Mr. Rowe's finances are not on trial here. Judge Calder looked at Avery. Ms. Holt, where are you going with this? Your Honor, Avery said calmly, the petitioners are asking to be named conservators of the estate. They are asking to be fiduciaries. Their own financial solvency is directly relevant to their qualification to manage another person's money. If they cannot manage their own household, They certainly cannot be trusted with my clients. Judge Calder nodded. Overruled. The witness will answer. My father cleared his throat. It was a wet, rattling sound. We have leveraged some equity for investment purposes. It is a standard strategy. Is it standard strategy to max out 5 credit cards? Avery asked, reading from a sheet. Is it standard strategy to take out a high-interest bridge loan 4 months ago? That is a private matter, my father snapped, his voice cracking. It has nothing to do with Madeline. On the contrary, Avery said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. It has everything to do with her, because the date of that bridge loan coincides almost exactly with the date you instructed your firm to draft this petition. My father gripped the railing of the witness stand. His knuckles were white. He looked trapped. We are just trying to protect the family, he yelled. And by family, do you mean your own liquidity? Avery asked. The silence that followed was deafening. My father was breathing hard. He had lost his composure. He had lost the veneer of the respectable lawyer. Judge Calder slowly lowered her pen. She turned her chair to face my father directly. Mr. Rowe, the judge said. Her voice was no longer dry. It was sharp. Are you telling this court that you are currently carrying significant debt? My father looked at the judge. He looked at his lawyer. There was nowhere to hide. We have had some liquidity issues, he muttered. Temporary issues. Judge Calder looked at the binder of my tax returns. Then she looked at the black file on Avery's desk. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Let me understand this, the judge said, speaking to the room at large. We have a respondent with a credit score of 820 and a thriving business, and we have petitioners who are leveraged to the hilt, asking for control over her money. She looked at Silas Thorne. Counsel, is there any actual evidence of Madeline Rowe's incapacity? Any at all? Or did you just file this because your clients needed a bailout? Silas Thorne stood up, looking pale. Your Honor, we rely on the testimony of the family. The testimony of the family, Judge Calder interrupted, seems to be contradicted by every piece of paper in this room. She turned back to my father. You may step down, Mr. Rowe, and I suggest you sit very quietly. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer a hearing about my sanity. It was an inquisition into their greed. I looked at Avery. She did not smile. She just closed the black folder and sat down next to me. We are not done, she whispered. We have not even played the ace yet. I looked across the aisle. My mother was weeping, but this time the tears were real. Blake was staring at the floor. My father was staring at nothing. They had walked into the courtroom expecting a lamb. They had found a wolf pack, and the alpha was sitting on the bench, wearing a black robe, and she looked very, very angry. Silas Thorne was a man accustomed to controlling the narrative, but the narrative was slipping through his fingers like wet sand. The courtroom air was thick with the residue of my father's humiliation. The judge was glaring at the plaintiff's table with open hostility. Thorne wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a crisp linen handkerchief and stood up. He knew he had to pivot. He knew the she is incompetent angle was dead in the water, so he went for the only thing left. Fear. Your Honor, Thorne said, his voice straining to regain its smooth authority. While Ms. Holt has presented some impressive paperwork, it only highlights the core issue. Secrecy. Ms. Rowe has deliberately concealed the true extent of her financial life from her family. This level of deception is not normal. It is pathological. If she is hiding this much, what else is she hiding? He gestured toward me, his finger shaking slightly. We believe there are significant, unmonitored assets that are at risk. A young woman with sudden, unexplained wealth is a target. She needs a guardian not because she is poor, but because she is hoarding resources she does not understand. We simply want transparency. We want to ensure these hidden assets are cataloged and protected for her future. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to regain the moral high ground. Avery Holt did not even look at him. She looked at Judge Calder. Your Honor, Avery said, remaining seated. Since counsel has raised the issue of hidden assets and the need for a catalog, the defense agrees. Transparency is excellent. In fact, we anticipated this exact concern. Avery stood up and pointed to a thick, sealed envelope that had been sitting on the clerk's desk since the session began. We moved to Unsealed Defense Exhibit C. This is a comprehensive, independent appraisal of Madeline Rowe's tangible and intangible assets, certified by a third-party auditor as of 48 hours ago. If the petitioners are worried about what is in the dark, let us turn on the lights. Judge Calder looked at the envelope. She looked at Thorne, who seemed suddenly wary. "Motion granted," Judge Calder said. "Madam Clerk, please open the exhibit and read the summary of assets into the record." The court clerk, a woman with a voice as dry as parchment, picked up a letter opener. The sound of tearing paper was the only noise in the room. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide. My father stopped massaging his temples and looked up. Blake sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. The clerk unfolded the document. She adjusted her glasses. Item 1, the clerk read, real estate property located at 102 Ocean Avenue, Newport, Rhode Island, top floor residential unit, 3,000 square feet, ocean frontage, free and clear of all liens, appraised value, $2.1 million. A sound escaped my mother's throat. It was a strangled gasp, like she had been punched in the gut. Item 2, the clerk continued, her voice monotone, investment portfolio held with Vanguard, diversified index funds and municipal bonds, current market value, $1.4 million. My father turned to look at me. His face was not that of a proud parent. It was the face of a man who realized he had been starving while sitting next to a banquet. Item 3, the clerk droned on, commercial residential property, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 6 units, fully occupied, annual net operating income, $85,000, appraised value, $900,000. Blake was vibrating. I could feel the energy radiating off him from 10 feet away. It was a mix of shock and a terrible, consuming hunger. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Item 4, the clerk said, marine vessel, 1980 vintage cruiser, restored, length, 52 feet, docked at Mystic Seaport, appraised value, $600,000. That was the spark. Blake Rowe did not just stand up, he exploded upward. His chair scraped violently against the floor, a harsh screech that made everyone jump. "You liar," Blake screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. "You told me you were broke. You told me you were doing a renovation. You have a 52-foot yacht?" "Blake," my father hissed, reaching for his arm. "Sit down." But Blake shook him off. He was past the point of legal strategy. He was seeing his salvation, and it was sitting right there, mocking him. "That is why you wouldn't answer my texts," Blake yelled, his voice cracking. "You were hoarding it. Do you know what I could do with that liquidity? Do you know what we owe?" "Mr. Rowe," Judge Calder shouted, slamming her gavel down. "Sit down immediately." Blake ignored her. He stepped out from behind the table. He took 2 aggressive steps toward me. The court officers at the back of the room instantly moved forward, their hands resting on their belts. "The penthouse," Blake rambled, his eyes wild. "I knew it. I told Dad you were hiding something. I looked at the property records, but you used an LLC. You think you are so smart?" He looked at the judge, his hands gesturing frantically. "Your Honor, she cannot keep this. That is family money. She is a Rowe. That yacht and that penthouse will be mine." The entire courtroom gasped. Even Silas Thorne looked horrified. He buried his face in his hands. Judge Calder's face went white with fury. She banged the gavel again. A sharp, cracking sound. "Order! I will hold you in contempt." But Blake was in a frenzy. He wasn't seeing a judge. He was seeing the solution to his gambling debts. He was seeing the lease payments on his Porsche. He was seeing the lifestyle he felt he was promised. "I have the papers right here," Blake shouted, pulling a crumpled document from his inside pocket. I already calculated the liquidation value. I ran the numbers last night. We just need her signature. The family will redistribute it correctly. It is not fair for her to have it all while we are drowning. The silence that followed that statement was absolute. It was heavy. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Blake stood there, breathing heavily, the crumpled paper in his hand. He looked around, suddenly realizing that the room was dead quiet. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring at the desk. He looked at his father, who had closed his eyes in defeat. He looked at the judge, who was staring at him with an expression of cold, dangerous clarity. 2 court officers were now standing directly behind him. "Sit down, Mr. Rowe," the officer said, "or you will be removed in handcuffs." Blake sank back into his chair. He looked deflated, like a balloon that had been popped. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the wreckage of his outburst. Judge Calder did not speak immediately. She let the words hang in the air. "I already calculated the liquidation value. The family will redistribute it." She looked at the plaintiff's table. "Is there any other part of your plan to strip the respondent of her assets that you would like to share with the court?" "Mr. Rowe?" Judge Calder asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Perhaps you have a schedule for selling her furniture as well?" Silas Thorne stood up. His voice was weak. "Your Honor, my client is emotional. He is under a lot of stress." He misspoke. He did not misspeak. Avery Holt said. Avery stood up slowly. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her voice cut through the room like a razor blade. She looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, we just witnessed a confession. The petitioner just admitted, on the record, that he has already calculated the liquidation value of my client's estate before a conservatorship was even granted. He admitted he has papers ready for her to sign. He admitted his intent is redistribution of assets to himself and his parents." Avery turned to look at Blake, who was shrinking into his suit. That was not the outcry of a concerned brother worried about his sister's mental health. Avery said, "That was the anger of a thief who just realized the vault is locked." She turned back to the judge. "The defense moves for an immediate dismissal of this petition with prejudice, and we further request that the transcript of Mr. Rowe's outburst be preserved for a separate inquiry into abuse of process and attempted fraud." Judge Calder looked at Avery. Then she looked at my family. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Blake was staring at the table, the crumpled paper still clutched in his hand, the evidence of his premeditation. The judge set her gavel down. She did not bang it this time. She folded her hands. "I have heard enough," Judge Calder said, "and quite frankly, I have seen enough." She picked up a pen and opened the file in front of her. "Mr. Thorne," she said without looking up, "you should advise your clients that the only reason they are not currently being read their rights is that I want to finish this civil matter first, but do not think for 1 second that I did not hear every word." She looked at me. For the first time, her face softened. "Ms. Rowe," she said, "I apologize that you had to endure this in my courtroom." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I didn't trust myself to speak. Judge Calder turned back to the room. "We will take a 5-minute recess while I write my ruling, but nobody is to leave this room, especially not the petitioners." She stood up and swept out of the room. The door closed behind her with a heavy click. The room erupted into whispers. My father turned to Blake and whispered something vicious. Blake flinched. My mother reached out for my father's hand, but he pulled it away. I sat there, feeling the wood of the table under my hands. I looked at the sealed envelope that was now open. The secret was out. My wealth was exposed. But instead of feeling vulnerable, I felt invincible. Blake had tried to grab the crown, but he had only managed to cut his own throat. And Avery was right. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was an exposure. He had shown the world exactly who he was, and in doing so, he had set me free. The 5 minutes of recess felt like 5 years. The air in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the unspoken panic radiating from the plaintiff's table. My father was whispering furiously to Silas Thorne. his face a mask of pale gray ash. My mother was staring at the table, her hands trembling so violently that the lace handkerchief was vibrating. Blake was slumped in his chair, staring at the wall, the adrenaline of his outburst having curdled into a sickly dread. I sat perfectly still. Avery was reviewing her notes, calm as a surgeon before an operation. She did not look at them. She did not look at me. She was waiting for the judge. When the door opened and Judge Marissa Calder walked back in, the atmosphere shifted from tense to freezing. She did not look at her docket. She did not adjust her glasses. She looked directly at Graham and Marjorie Rowe. She sat down and folded her hands on the bench. "Before I issue my ruling," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I have one question, a simple one. If you are so terrified for your daughter's well-being, if you truly believe she is mentally incapacitated, why is there not a single piece of medical evidence in this file?" My father started to stand up, but the judge held up a hand. "Sit down. Mr. Rowe, I am asking your counsel." Silas Thorne stood up. He looked like a man who wished he were anywhere else on earth. "Your Honor," he stammered. The family felt that an involuntary commitment or a psychiatric evaluation would be too traumatic for Madeline. They wanted to handle this privately, through the conservatorship, to spare her the stigma. "To spare her the stigma?" Judge Calder repeated, her eyebrows raising. "So, to spare her the stigma of a doctor's visit, you decided to strip her of her legal rights, take control of her multi-million-dollar estate, and declare her incompetent in a public court record?" Thorne opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "It does not add up," the judge said, "unless, of course, the goal was never her health." Avery Holt stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "if I may." The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Ms. Holt." Avery walked to the podium. She held a single piece of paper. It wasn't a thick file this time, just one sheet. "The question of why has been the shadow over this entire proceeding." Avery said, "Why now? Why, after 14 years of estrangement, did the Rowe family decide on October 3rd that Madeline Rowe was in urgent danger?" She placed the paper on the judge's bench. "This is a public record from the county clerk's office, coupled with a docket update from the State Bar Association. It is a detail that is easy to miss if you are not looking for it." Avery turned to look at my father. On October 1st, 48 hours before this petition was filed, two things happened. First, a notice of default was recorded against the Rowe family residents in Crestview Hills for failure to meet the terms of their bridge loan. Second, Graham Rowe received a formal notice from the Ethics Board regarding the malpractice suit, indicating that his personal assets were now subject to attachment for damages. The judge looked at the paper, then she looked at the date on the petition file in front of her. "October 1st, the judge murmured, "and this petition was filed October 3rd. "It is a perfect overlap," Avery said. "They did not file this because Madeline was sick. They filed this because they were insolvent. They needed a lifeline. They needed an asset they could liquidate immediately to satisfy their own creditors before the walls closed in. Madeline was not a patient to them. Your Honor, she was a piggy bank." The judge looked up. Her expression had changed. It was no longer just anger. It was the cold, hard look of a jurist who realizes the court has been weaponized. She turned to Silas Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," the judge asked, "did you know about your client's financial insolvency when you filed this petition?" Thorne turned pale. He looked at my father, then back at the judge. He was calculating the cost of loyalty versus the cost of his license. I was not aware of the specifics of their personal debts." "Your Honor," Thorne said quickly, throwing my family under the bus to save himself, "I relied on their representations that they were financially stable and acting in the best interest of the respondent." "So they lied to you, too," the judge stated. Thorne lowered his head. "It appears so, Your Honor." My father made a noise, a strangled protest, but he did not speak. He knew it was over. He knew that the moment his lawyer distanced himself, the trap had snapped shut. Judge Calder took a deep breath. She picked up the transcript of the proceedings that the court reporter had been typing. "Let the record show," the judge said, her voice ringing through the silent room, "that during the recess, I reviewed the stenographer's notes regarding Mr. Blake Rowe's outburst." She looked at Blake. He shrank into his chair. Mr. Rowe explicitly stated, and I quote, "The yacht and the penthouse will be mine." He further stated, "I have the papers right here. I already calculated the liquidation value." She slammed the file shut. "This is not a conservatorship case. This is a raid." She looked at my parents. "You came into my courtroom, under the guise of parental concern, to abuse the legal system for personal gain. You attempted to use the state's power to strip a successful, independent woman of her autonomy because you failed to manage your own finances. It is predatory. It is transparent. And it is deeply shameful." My mother was crying into her hands, but the judge offered no comfort. "I find that the petitioners have failed to meet even the most basic burden of proof regarding Madeline Rowe's incapacity. In fact, the evidence suggests that Ms. Rowe is more fiscally responsible than all three petitioners combined." She picked up her gavel. "The petition for involuntary conservatorship is denied." She struck the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice hard, "I am dismissing this with prejudice. That means you cannot refile this. You cannot come back next month with a different lawyer. You cannot shop for a different judge. This matter is closed. Forever." She wasn't done. "Given the bad faith demonstrated by the petitioners and the admission of motive by Mr. Blake Rowe, I am ordering the petitioners to pay 100% of Madeline Rowe's legal fees. Every billable hour Ms. Holt has charged, every filing fee, every cost of the independent appraisal, you will pay it. You have 30 days. My father flinched. He didn't have the money. I knew he didn't have the money. That order was going to force him into bankruptcy. "And finally," Judge Calder said, looking at my father with eyes that promised ruin, "I am referring this file, including the transcript of today's hearing and the financial disclosures regarding the concealed debts, to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office for an investigation into abuse of process and potential attempted fraud." My father gasped. It was the first time he had made a sound since the recess. This was the death knell. A referral from a judge was not a complaint he could make go away with a phone call. It was a career ender. Judge Calder stood up. "Ms. Rowe," she said to me, "you are free to go. And might I suggest you keep that yacht? It sounds lovely." "Court is adjourned," the bailiff yelled. The judge swept out of the room. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of my mother's weeping. My father sat like a stone statue, staring at the empty bench. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. Blake was staring at his hands, his face a mask of shock. Avery closed her folder. She turned to me. "It is done," she said softly. I did not cheer. I did not smile. I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest, leaving me lightheaded. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. It was the breath I had been holding for 14 years. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my navy suit. I looked at my family one last time. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the ruin of their own lives. They were consumed by the consequences of their own greed. I picked up my bag. "Let's go, Avery," I said quietly. We walked down the aisle, past the table where the people who shared my DNA sat in the wreckage they had created. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The judge had cut the strings. But as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway, I knew the story wasn't quite finished. The legal battle was over. But the final accounting, the true cost they would pay, was just beginning. The echo of the gavel seemed to hang in the air long after Judge Calder had left the bench. The court reporter was still typing, finalizing the official record that would serve as the tombstone for my father's career. The judge had been specific in her instructions before she walked out. She wanted a verbatim transcript of Blake's outburst attached to the order of dismissal. She wanted every greedy syllable, every threat, and every admission of premeditated theft preserved in black and white. I stood up, feeling a strange sensation in my legs. It was not weakness. It was the absence of a burden I had been carrying since I was 22 years old. Avery Holt guided me toward the heavy oak doors. We did not run, but we moved with purpose. We needed to be out of that room before the shock wore off and the reality set in for the people sitting at the plaintiff's table. Out in the hallway, the air felt different. It was breathable. "Do you understand what just happened in there?" Avery asked, her voice low and intense. I nodded. "We won." "It is more than a win." "Madeline," Avery said, stopping to look me in the eye. "That referral to the district attorney? That is not a slap on the wrist. That is a guillotine. Your father is going to face an ethics investigation. The Bar Association will suspend his license pending an inquiry, and with his firm already looking for a reason to oust him over the malpractice suit, this is the nail in the coffin. He is finished." I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a heavy, somber acknowledgement of tragedy. He had built his entire life around his reputation, and he had destroyed it in a single morning because he wanted to steal from his own daughter. The doors behind us swung open. I heard the frantic clicking of heels and the heavy tread of expensive loafers. I stiffened, my instinct to run flaring up one last time, but then I remembered the paper in Avery's briefcase. I remembered the judge's voice. I did not have to run anymore. "Maddie, wait!" It was Blake. He was hurrying down the corridor. His tie loosened, his face slick with sweat. He looked like a man who had just watched a car crash in slow motion and realized he was the driver. "Please, you have to listen," Blake stammered, reaching out as if to grab my arm, then pulling back when Avery stepped between us. "I did not mean it," Blake said, his voice cracking. I was stressed. You know how I get. It was just talk. You have to tell the judge it was just a misunderstanding. If they investigate me for fraud, Maddie, I could go to jail. They will look at my debts. They will look at everything." I looked at my brother. For years, his voice had been a trigger for my anxiety. Now, it just sounded like noise. "Talk to my lawyer," I said. My voice was calm. It was not the voice of a sister. It was the voice of a stranger. Blake blinked, stunned. "Maddie, come on. We are family. You cannot let them ruin Dad. You cannot let them come after me. I am your brother." Graham and Marjorie Rowe caught up to him then. My mother was dabbing her eyes, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. My father looked gray. His posture slumped. The arrogance completely evaporated. "Madeline," my father said, his voice rasping, "we need to discuss this. We can handle this internally. We can withdraw the petition formally if you just agree to sign a statement saying this was a family dispute that got out of hand. We can fix this." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me 14 years ago not to come back begging. "There is nothing to fix. Graham," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life, "the judge has already ruled. The transcript is already filed. It is out of my hands." "But you can advocate for us," my mother cried, reaching for me. "You can tell them we love you." I took a step back. "You do not love me," I said. "You love what you thought you could take from me. And now that you know you cannot take it, you are afraid." I turned to Avery. "I am done here." We walked away. I heard Blake calling my name one more time, his voice rising in panic. But I did not turn around. I walked down the long marble corridor, out the front doors of the courthouse, and into the bright, cold November sunlight. We went straight to Avery's office. There was no champagne. There was no party. There was just more work. But this time, it was the work of liberation. Avery pulled a stack of documents from her drawer. "We need to close the loop," she said. "Now that we have exposed your assets, we need to protect them. If something happens to you tomorrow, under the current laws of intestacy, your parents would still be your next of kin. We need to change that, today." I sat down and signed. I signed a new will, naming a charitable trust and Tessa Lane as my beneficiaries. I signed a durable power of attorney, giving Tessa the right to make medical decisions for me if I was incapacitated. I signed a directive that explicitly barred Graham, Marjorie, and Blake Rowe from ever acting as my guardians or accessing my medical records. It took an hour. When I put the pen down, the ink was black and permanent. The legal umbilical cord was finally cut. "They have no power," Avery said, witnessing the last signature. "If they try to contact you, they go through me. If they show up at your house, we file for a restraining order based on the harassment record from court. You are a fortress now. Madeline." I thanked her. I paid her invoice in full right there on my phone app, adding a bonus that made her raise her eyebrows. Then I got in my car. I did not go back to the small rental in Southport. I drove north. I drove for 2 hours, watching the landscape change, watching the ocean appear on my right side, gray and vast and beautiful. I pulled into Newport. I drove past the mansions on Bellevue Avenue, past the tourists, and parked in the garage of the building where I owned the top floor. I took the elevator up. I keyed in the code. The door opened, and I walked into my penthouse. The late afternoon sun was flooding the space, turning the wide plank floors to gold. It smelled of lavender and sea salt. It was quiet. For 2 years, I had come here in secret. I had treated this place like a stolen moment, afraid that if anyone knew, it would be taken away. I had lived in fear that my success was something I had to apologize for. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out. The harbor was spread out below me, the boats bobbing in the water like toys. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Blake, then a voicemail from my mother, then an email from my father's personal address. I looked at the notifications. Then, I went into my settings. Block contact. Block contact. Block contact. I put the phone down on the marble island. They were going to lose their house. My father was going to lose his license. Blake was likely facing bankruptcy and a criminal probe. They were going to face the consequences of a lifetime of living on credit and treating people like commodities. And I was going to have dinner. I changed into jeans and a thick sweater. I grabbed my keys and walked down to the marina. The air was crisp, smelling of brine and diesel. I walked down the dock until I saw her, the Verity. She was beautiful. Her hull was polished, her brass gleaming in the twilight. She wasn't a modern plastic yacht. She had character. She had scars that had been sanded down and healed. She was strong. I stepped onto the deck. The boat rocked gently under my weight, a welcoming, familiar motion. I walked to the bow and sat down on the teak bench. I looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the dark water. Avery had said something to me right before I left her office. She said, "The court is not a place for families to rob each other. They walked in there thinking they were the law, and they found out they were just the defendants. They confessed with their own mouths." She was right. They had dug their own graves with their arrogance. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, salty air. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for the criticism. I wasn't waiting for the demand. The yacht was mine. The penthouse was mine. The money was mine. But those were just things. They were wood and glass and numbers on a screen. The real victory was the silence in my head, the voice that used to tell me I was a glitch, a failure, a disappointment. That voice was gone. It had been silenced by the bang of a gavel. I looked at the lights of the bridge in the distance. I was 36 years old. My name was Madeline Rowe, and for the first time, that name didn't belong to a family. It belonged to me. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, and I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to see the good guys win.